There are places on the map of antiquity that seem to breathe just beneath the surface, visible only in the corner of a scribe's eye. The land of Punt is one such ghost, a kingdom so essential to ancient Egypt that it was carved into temple walls. Yet its true location has vanished into the haze of time. Imagine standing in the scorching silence of the Nubian desert, with only the echo of a forgotten trade wind whispering through the rocks. For over 1,000 years, Egyptian pharaohs sent magnificent fleets into the unknown, across what they called the Great Green Sea, to reach a land overflowing with wonders. The question that still haunts us tonight is simple, and yet it swallows every certainty. Where was this paradise that supplied the gods? And how did an entire world simply disappear from our memory? Our story begins not with an answer, but with a shimmering heat haze on the coast of the Red Sea around 1,500 years before the birth of Christ. Queen Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who ruled as a king, ordered a divine expedition to a place so sacred that it was depicted as a garden of the gods on the walls of her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahri. If you walk through those colonnades today, you can still see the painted reliefs, their ochre and cobalt blue faded, but still singing the praises of a distant, impossible voyage. Stone artists portrayed a stilted village rising from the water, surrounded by dam palms and myrrh trees so heavy with resin that their scent seems to drift through the millennia. The Egyptians recorded the exchange meticulously. Gold, ebony, ivory, panther skins, living baboons, and the precious green incense coveted for temple rituals, eye paint, and the skin of the dead. These reliefs are not myth. They are a catalog of a real economy, a list of items too specific, too organic to be a fabrication of the soul's journey through the underworld. We are looking at a photograph carved in limestone of a trade negotiation between two rich, powerful nations, yet we cannot see the face of Egypt's partner. The Egyptian scribes called the king of Punt Parahu and his queen Ati, painting her as a regal figure with a curved stature and skin the color of dark copper. They recorded the goods and the prices, but they refused to record the coordinates, as if the way to Punt was a divine secret meant to be inhaled like the smoke of frankincense, never spoken aloud. This is the first turn in our labyrinth. A civilization so meticulous about recording grain taxes and battle dates chose to leave the route to its most vital trading partner, shrouded in a deliberate cosmic silence. To understand the void, we must first look at the ships that were meant to find it, resting now as wooden skeletons in museum halls and ancient dry docks on the Red Sea coast. Archaeology has uncovered the industrial port of Mersa Gawasis, a hub constructed from recycled cedar planks and limestone anchors, sitting at the edge of the barren Wadi Gassis. Here, in the relentless wind, teams found coils of ancient ship ropes, stone tools, and shattered cargo boxes still bearing the painted label, "The Wonders of Punt." The physical evidence confirms that these journeys were not coastal skimming trips. These were deep-water vessels stitched together with wooden tenons capable of months at sea. You can almost feel the weight of the decision as the harbor master gave the final signal and the flotilla pushed away from the safety of the African shore, heading toward the rising sun. There is a powerful logic to this, a logic based on aromatics. The frankincense and myrrh that made Punt famous grow almost exclusively in the parched scrublands of the Horn of Africa and parts of the Arabian Peninsula. When analytical chemists scraped the residue from an ancient Puntite pottery shard, they found traces of a chemical signature linking it to the tree sap of the East African Rift. Yet logic is a dangerous compass when navigating the fog of antiquity. and the puzzle refuses to be solved by botany alone. The excavated rubbish pits of the sailors' camp at Mersa Gawasis revealed a broken menagerie, the rest stop refuse of a strange bestiary brought back as exotic tribute. Historians found the mummified remains of a sacred baboon, a creature the Egyptians venerated as the embodiment of the god Thoth, the scribe of the gods who recorded the judgment of the dead. And this is where the hard science of the 21st century reached its cold fingers into the warm myth of the past to drag out a destabilizing truth. By studying the strontium and oxygen isotopes locked in the tooth enamel of these mummified baboons, scientists attempted to read a geographic diary written in the water they drank as infants. A single data point in the enamel of a long-dead monkey forced historians to tear up the map and acknowledge a radical hypothesis. The land of Punt might have been a two-continent confederation. Perhaps the Egyptians traded with a cultural sphere that spanned the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, a maritime kingdom that controlled the flow of goods from both the African savanna and the Arabian desert. Where archaeology faltered, geological whispers began to fill the silence, telling a story that predates the pharaohs themselves. There is a lesser-known theory, carved not in temple walls but in the dry riverbeds of the Sahara, which suggests Punt was the cultural memory of a green paradise that had already begun to die. Some researchers theorize that during the humid African period, when the desert was a savanna teeming with giraffes and crocodiles, a vast cultural network stretched from the Nile deep into the interior. Under this lens, Punt is not a specific city to be dug up, but a collapsing horizon, a memory of the last lush refuges of a drying continent, retreating further east and south as the sand devoured the grasslands. The myrrh trees were not just a commodity. They were refugees on a final mountain island of moisture, and the Egyptian voyages were desperate attempts to hold on to the scent of a vanishing world. This casts the sea expeditions not as a bold venture into the unknown, but as a ritualized return to a geographic memory buried deep in the collective consciousness, a pilgrimage to the cradle of moisture. It transforms the sailors, waving from the temple walls, into time travelers, seeking a past that was literally crumbling into salt and dust behind them. But if Punt was a memory, it was a stubbornly physical one, a place of such vitality that the Egyptians believed their very spiritual survival depended on it. The incense that burned endlessly in the vast temple of Karnak was not a luxury. It was a functional requirement to appease the gods, an atmospheric veil without which the sun god Ra might not rise in the morning. Now we must descend into the labyrinth of desperate speculation, where the soft soil of hard evidence gives way to the jagged rock of linguistic riddles. Some scholars, peering at the roll of a papyrus like a cryptographer searching for a hidden cipher, have proposed a radical toponymic leap. One hypothesis drags Punt off the African map entirely and places it not in the heat of the equator, but in the lush delta of the Indus Valley, the cradle of Harappa. The argument rests on a fragile linguistic bridge. The similarity between the Egyptian word for a local chief and the titles used in the great port cities of the Bronze Age East. However, the biological evidence fights against this theory with a violent stubbornness. The genetic traces and the specific species of aromatic trees simply do not drift in the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean. A darker and more recent hypothesis suggests that we have been looking for Punt in the wrong direction, watching the waves when we should have been listening to the currents of the Nile. Could the fabled land of the gods be located not east toward the sunrise, but deep into the heart of Africa, where the Nile twists through the Sud swamps, a watery maze of floating vegetation. The Egyptians possessed a dual mythology of the divine land, sometimes placing it in the Orient, and other times linking it to the southern source of the river, the springs of creation where the Nile rose from the underworld. In this reading, the maritime depictions are a symbolic illusion, or perhaps a record of a combined Nile and sea route, a logistical nightmare of dragging ships across the desert to a lost freshwater lake. As we chase these mirages, the very definition of a kingdom begins to dissolve like a salt crystal in the monsoon rains. Perhaps our modern obsession with a single pin-drop location is the wrong question, an artifact of our need for capitals and borders rather than a truth about the ancient world. Punt might have been a shifting zone of encounter, a cultural hollow rather than a dot, encompassing coastal enclaves, seasonal incense harvesting camps, and nomadic trading posts that moved with the grazing herds. Sailors returning to Thebes would speak not of a city, but of a chaotic sensory overload. The glint of obsidian, the shriek of unfamiliar primates, the heaviness of wood so dense it sank in water, the sticky resin burning on a beach altar. And herein lies the deep human obsession with this lost ally, a mirror held up to our own civilizational anxiety. We cannot accept the silence of the ancients because we live in a world of total satellite surveillance, where every inch of the planet has been digitized and cached. The idea that a thriving, sophisticated kingdom, a land of frankincense terraces and divine electrum, could hide from our satellites and our ground-penetrating radar is a wound to our modern pride. The explorers of the 19th and 20th centuries felt this pull acutely, setting out into the Danakil Depression and the scorched mountains of Eritrea. With a Victorian certainty they could pin the myth down. They found obsidian flakes, ancient stone axes, and shattered pottery, but no grand temple dedicated to Hathor, no inscribed stele, reading "Welcome to Punt," founded by the will of Amun. The absence of a monumental city has driven some archaeologists to a grim conclusion. Punt was never a centralized kingdom, but a stateless yet highly organized network of chiefdoms that deliberately resisted the pyramid-building hierarchy of the Nile. This would mean the Egyptians were trading with a ghostly mirror image of themselves, a society so fluid in its structure that it has left no throne room for us to excavate. If this is true, the monumental art of Hatshepsut is not a depiction of a lesser power, but a negotiation with an untamable, decentralized force, an anarchy that produced the scent of heaven. Standing on the shores of modern Somalia, where the desert wind scrapes the acacia scrub down to bare rock, you can feel the psychological toll of this search. The turquoise water looks exactly as it did 4,000 years ago, a blinding sheet of silver under the midday sun. Yet the reflection that stares back at you is entirely mute. We tell ourselves that time reveals all things. But standing at the edge of this particular silence, you begin to suspect that time is not a revealer, but an eraser of ink. The thrill of the Punt mystery is the vertigo of knowing that an Egyptian commander once anchored his timber vessel exactly where you are standing, smelled the same roasting fish, saw the same red moon rising behind the jagged mountains, and yet his world is as inaccessible to us as a dream upon waking. To the pharaohs, Punt was the land of the god, the geographical proof of a divine order, the eastern frontier that mirrored the setting sun of the western dead. Without it, the cosmic cycle was broken. The precious green powder that healed the skin of gods and stopped the putrefaction of the royal dead would cease to flow. The human obsession, then, is about more than archaeology. It is about the extinction of the sacred and our persistent, hungry search for a place that still smells of the divine. These creatures crossed the sea as living tribute, perhaps captured as infants in the frankincense forests of the Horn, destined to live their lives in the green enclosures of a Memphite temple. They are the children of Punt, yet they cannot tell us the name of the inlet or the shape of the bay that they saw with their young eyes when they were ripped from the canopy. Every scientific test we perform on their bones, the laser ablation slicing into their molars to release the ancient isotopic signature, is a desperate plea for a whisper that will not come. The search for Punt has consumed scholars, not because they hope to find immense gold, but because they hope to find a mirror. We need Punt to explain Egypt, to prove that the great stone civilization was not a lonely genius talking to itself in the desert, but a node in a vibrant, forgotten global Bronze Age complex. This is the terrifying possibility, that there were dozens of these shadow kingdoms, these Punt-like confederations of the sea and the sand, that fueled the ancient world but left no written trace of their own. We have their aromatics sealed in alabaster jars, their gold hammered into the death mask of Tutankhamun, their leopard skins rotting in the dust of a high priest's tomb, but we do not have their voice. The silence of Punt is the silence of the supplier, the silent partner who holds the resources that a superpower needs to survive, yet remains faceless, existing only in the thanks offered on a temple wall. And yet, in the last few years, the shifting sands of geopolitics have begun to reveal a landscape in Somalia and northern Ethiopia that was forbidden to archaeologists for a generation. Satellite imaging now reveals strange crescent-shaped stone structures, massive cairns, and ancient terrace walls hidden beneath the thornbrush in areas that paleobotanists identify as the prime territory for high-quality myrrh. But for now, as the sun sets on the Bab el-Mandeb, painting the water a deep crimson that the Egyptians would have associated with the blood of the justified dead, the secret holds. The water rips through the strait like a river of black glass, separating the towering granitic peaks of Yemen from the bleaching volcanic plain of Djibouti, a harsh gate between worlds. You close your eyes on that strait, you can hear the drum of the rowers, the creak of the Egyptian cedar, and the murmured prayer of a captain who knows he is sailing off the edge of the world known to men. And so we are left with the enduring enigma, a kingdom obscured not by distance, but by a conceptual fog that our modern minds struggle to penetrate. The land of Punt endures as a philosophical challenge, a refusal to let us turn the pre-classical world into a tidy diagram of arrows and borders. Perhaps the true value of Punt is not in locating it, but in the space it opens in our imagination, the nagging, beautiful possibility that a civilization can be entirely real and simultaneously entirely lost. There is a comfort in believing history is a solved puzzle until you stand at the edge of this silence and realize that the map of human achievement is largely drawn in invisible ink. The incense has long since burned away, the smoke absorbed into the limestone ceiling of Karnak, leaving only a faint stain that tourists mistake for candle smoke. The baboon mummies sit in climate-controlled drawers, their chemical secrets spilled into the academic papers. Yet the soul of Thoth, the god of wisdom, laughs at our confusion. Did the Egyptian priests deliberately erase the navigation charts to keep the world's most valuable trade secret locked in the hold of a royal memory you had to be born into? Or was the root so obvious, so second nature to the leather-skinned mariners of the Middle Kingdom that it never occurred to them to write it down for a future they could not predict? That is the true sadness of history. The vitally important things go unrecorded because they are too common, too everyday. The way the rudder creaks against the peg, the sight of the seabirds flying out from the coast of Punt in the first light of dawn, the specific taste of the well water. These realities are dead. We are left only with the heavy gold rings of the queen, the bloated stomach of a captured animal, and the silence that follows a prayer to a god who has turned his back on the modern world. The forgotten kingdom of Punt remains our eternal ally, not in the political sphere, but in the kingdom of mystery, the ally that teaches us humility. It reminds us that for all our scanning and decoding, the past remains a vast, dark ocean across which the fragile ships of our understanding rarely venture without returning empty-handed. As the fog of time rolls in over the obsidian flakes and the dry myrrh sap, the land of the god ultimately retreats back into the shadows of the African Golden Age, refusing to be found. And somewhere beyond the reef, if you listen closely, you can still hear the splash of an oar from a fleet that has been sailing toward the horizon for 4,000 years, never quite reaching home.